Hey everyone, this is BlackOKC, and this video will complete the Supernova review that I started recently. In part 1, I talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the chassis and the builds for the 1, 3, and Boiler variants. So if you want to check that out, I have a link below. Today, we'll talk about the builds that I use on the A, B, and C variants, as well as do a full demo of the build for the B. In my earlier Supernova video, I talked about my build philosophy, which is essentially that I try to use different playstyles for each variant of a chassis that I own. This is quite a challenge on the Supernova because most of them are energy boats. So for the A and B variants, we deviate a bit from the well-known meta builds. So what I want to emphasize is that the setups that I'm going to show won't necessarily be the best build for each variant, but they won't be terrible either. I personally think it beats playing the same build on every single chassis. First, the Supernova A variant has 4 missile and 4 energy hardpoints, and it is the variant with the highest number of missile hardpoints. So we're going to try and use that. One way to build it is to turn it into an LRM boat like this, and it won't be too bad. On maps like Polar or Grimplexus, quad LRM-15s can do some work. However, because of the inconsistency of this playstyle, I prefer to look at alternatives if possible. My first attempt at an SRM-based build was this LPL-SRM combo, and I demoed this build at the beginning of the video. When I first made this, it looked okay, and the intention is to play range most of the time, but have the SRMs as a backup option for when brawls are unavoidable. But I quickly realized that the problem is that it doesn't have the heatsinks to use the quad LPLs very well, and at close range, 4 SRM6s are okay, but still kind of weak relative to your tonnage. So if you try to use some LPLs to supplement your SRMs, the build gets really hot very fast. As you can see, that's really the pitfall of multi-role builds. They just don't do any one thing very well, and that puts this build at a disadvantage against properly piloted single-range mechs. So if we want a single range SRM based build, we can do something like this. As you can see here, we're using a standard engine because the XL gives us too much weight. Although the Supernova chassis itself isn't ideal for brawling, this weapon payload makes the most out of that face time. The MPLs are decent brawler weapons that can also reach out beyond brawl range when the situation permits. But largely you do want to stay behind your ranged allies until you can find 1v1s that you can win, for example against out of position long range builds. When you're in that brawl range though, your side torsos do take a lot of damage, so pay attention to when one of them gets starting to get weak, and you try to roll damage to the other side. Next, we have the Supernova B, which, like the SNV-3 variant, has a head energy hardpoint. This really lends itself to single slot energy weapons like the ERML and the MPL. But if you see my previous videos, we've already done a Laser Vomit LPL ERML build and an NPL build. So on this variant, we're going to use ER large lasers instead, which I'm strangely fond of, not because they're good weapons, but because they're more challenging than other weapons to play well. The ER large laser is another weapon that can look great to the new player, but in practice, the super long duration means very spread damage and long exposure times. However, if you use 4 of them as I do here, it starts to make sense, especially on long range and cold maps like Alpine and Frozen City, which do get picked a lot these days. The MPLs are there mostly because we have a lot of free tonnage, and we want to avoid being completely useless at close range. But I've had matches where I've never used them even once, and staying at range is pretty much what you should be doing anyways. Since this is sort of my pet build, I'll have a full match demo of it at the end of the video, so do stick around. Lastly, we have the C variant, which I think many people will consider to be the best non-hero variant among the Supernovas. That's because it has 4 highish mounted energy hardpoints, which you can use for quad PPCs or quad LPLs, as I do here. I say highish because there's some distance below the cockpit, so you do have to expose a good chunk of your torso to be able to fire your weapons. This and the Supernova's lack of speed holds it back from being a top-tier assault mech, in my opinion. I also debated ER PPCs and LPLs, and again, I've just found that the heat efficiency of the LPLs make it a better choice on average in the public queue. This is the same conclusion that I had when I did my Timberwolf Prime guide a while back. 4-year PPC is just way too hot unless the mech has some heatgen quirks to go with it. Certainly in a more competitive environment, the low face time and pinpoint damage of the ER PPCs win out. But against the average player in the public queue, I think the LPLs make more sense. The MPLs are really there, again as backup, not intending to be used very frequently. But when the match does get close, your alpha is 84 points, which usually leads to people running away from you after getting shot. Well, one of the questions that a lot of people are interested in is where the Supernova ranks among the clan assaults. Certainly the Kodiak and the Marauder 2C are better, due to better hardpoint locations, speed, and a smaller profile in the case of the MAT 2C. The Supernova's main competition is the Direwolf, which shares a lot of the same problems. I say if you look at the Supernovas as a whole, it probably ranked below a Direwolf. This is mostly because the Supernova, like the Dire, has to expose much of its surface area to get its weapons out. But the Dire can really make that exposure worth it because it's able to carry much more firepower and have higher sustained DPS than most Supernova builds. The Supernova's extra speed helps, but it doesn't fully compensate for its much weaker firepower. However, two variants stand out above the Dires in my opinion. The Boiler, Hero, and the C variant. The Boiler can do the same ERPPC Gauss build as the Dire, but it is quicker to get back into cover. The C can run a playstyle that's completely different from what the Dire can do, because it can legitimately hill hump and minimize return fire. But again, in my opinion, on average, the Supernova is a step below the Dire. Alright, so now let's get into the Supernova B demo, and let's check it out.
Beta to help out there, which is
So
where
it does
the
take a
main
couple of
battle will
minutes
be.
for us to get into engagement range as expected on Polar, but here we can actually start firing and doing damage at 1600 meters out. At 1600 the ER large lasers are kind of just doing scratch damage, but it does kind of has a psychological impact, and as well as it keeps their head down. So one of the reasons that I'm showing you this, as you can notice, Polar is a low heat, is a cold and long range map, which is the ideal situation for this ER large
Oh,
laser
that's
build.
wonderful.
And I'm showing you this not because this is such a great build, it's not like that. And I want to emphasize again that ER large lasers have a bunch of problems, and I generally don't recommend ER large lasers for public queue builds, but it can work quite well as we can see here. This We do want to try to keep the enemy at over 1,000 if possible. At above 1,000, there's very few weapons that can reach you. ERPPCs start becoming like less accurate at those ranges. You can see that guy missing. Um, and large pulse lasers like do no damage. Clan large pulse lasers do no damage at those ranges. So Gauss rifle also has um, loses quite a bit of damage at those ranges as well. So we try to keep them at over 1,000 if possible. And at 1,000, we're doing most of our damage. It's getting what like more than half the damage out. So we're in a situation where we can't see any more targets. That's why we have to move just a little bit closer. that that duration is so long that the Kintaro just like walked across it and it didn't even stop. So we're getting seen by a few people here, so that's why we're trying to get to cover. If it was just one person, one enemy, we might just stay out above, but there were several mechs that were firing at us. It's like non-stop your large lasers for some of these guys. Like, it's gonna get annoying at some point, even though the damage is kind of spread and um, it's at some of those ranges we're doing maybe um, 7 points of damage per salvo of per ear large laser, but that it adds up. We see these guys are maybe pushing here, so we're gonna try to get out of here if possible. Now they stop the push. I know we're getting like arm shots on this Thunderbolt, which is not ideal, but that was the only thing that we can shoot at the moment. and it really gets his attention away from the teammates. That's something that, the ELR lasers are pretty good at. It's really good at suppressive fire, even though it might not be killing everything right away. Um, it keeps their head down. Okay, we got to get closer here because otherwise they're just going to sit behind a hill and we're not going to be able to get any shots. We're getting a little bit closer to MPL range now, so might be able to fire some MPLs here. So you can see, like, primarily we're not trying to use MPLs as much, but the only reason why we're getting up close is because we're not going to be able to get any more shots if we stayed there.
Everybody's on the way. Hang on, stamina.
Thank you.
And that is game. I left the game at 85%. Didn't get shot many times. So yeah, there we go. Okay guys, I hope you found this video to be informative. If you have anything to add, please leave a comment below. Make sure to subscribe to get updated on my latest MWO video uploads, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.